This season of Rick and Morty was obviously a very polarizing one, as a lot of things plagued it before it was even released. And I bet you've seen tons of videos on how this is the downfall of Rick and Morty or something. But I don't think season 7 can be described as simply a thumbs up or a thumbs down. There are some things that I absolutely enjoyed, even possibly more than the previous seasons. But there are also some problems that are emerging, some worse than others. By the way, spoilers ahead. Duh. So one of the biggest criticisms that I kept hearing was that the writing for this season was just not the same or even downright lazy. And God, I couldn't disagree more. I think the writing is actually the strongest point of this season, especially when it comes to the character development. Specifically for Rick, as this season's almost tailored to him and his growth. We've seen in previous seasons his near obsession with hunting down and killing Rick Prime. And we see the continuation of that in the beginning of the season, with all of this culminating in episode 5 when he finally gets his revenge. But then he realizes that he has nothing. The hole that was temporarily filled with hatred for this specific version of himself is now empty again. All he's left with is the bitterness of the past. As Rick Prime said, "You live in the echoes of my life." And I think this is all brilliantly capped off in the post-credit scene of that same episode. After Uncle Slow is killed, yes I know, a very pivotal character in this show, we see his wife go down the same path that Rick once did. But in the end, she chooses to let go of that hate and actually pursue building a life that would be worth living. And when everything's all said and done, she's the one that was able to find peace and acceptance with her loss, as opposed to Rick, who is visibly detached from reality, even though he's surrounded by a happy family. And throughout the rest of the show, you'll see Rick try to come to grips with the here and now rather than living in the past, with one of my favorite scenes being the ending of the season, where Rick is looking down the same fear hole that Morty just went into and saw his dead wife. But instead of chasing this echo of the past, he was finally able to let go, even if it was only for this one moment. And speaking of the fear hole in the season finale of the show, the writing for the individual episodes, for the most part, still has that wacky, crazy, out of fucking left field concepts that are really enjoyable to watch. Such as episode 4, where the Smith family has a weekly spaghetti night, and they're eating this up, loving it like it's laced with something. But this euphoria is shattered when Morty realizes that the spaghetti is from the entrails of a suicide victim from an alternate reality where their insides are turned into spaghetti. Like I said, batshit crazy concept. But this leads us to a very interesting message about the ethics around specific foods, and how there's not really a moral way around it. You either accept the truth and reality of the situation, or you live within a falsehood. And what I mean by that is willful ignorance, which we see in the very end of the episode when the Smith family openly admit that they don't want to know where their food came from. They would rather not know, thus avoiding any moral accountability for their actions. Mind you, I'm not a vegan in any way, shape, or form, but needless to say, it's an interesting and thought-provoking message, while still being a very funny and dark episode. Morty creating a sentient suicide torso just to find a somewhat barely more ethical way of consuming the entrails of humans is deeply fucked up and hilarious. So while I do love the writing for a specific character, aka Rick, the majority of the other characters besides Morty in the season finale really didn't get much. Summer got her own episode, but honestly I found this the weakest out of all of them, practically feeling like a filler episode relying on its wacky concept. And unlike the spaghetti episode, which does the same thing, at least that had a thought-provoking message and was funny. This, on the other hand, doesn't. It just felt meaningless. Besides one really quick interaction where Rick tells Summer that she reminds him a lot of her grandmother, there isn't really much there. And you know I'm scraping at the bottom of the barrel when I'm pointing out one piece of dialogue exchange. Jerry also kinda got his own episode, and there is a tad bit of development there as both Rick and Jerry gain a better understanding of each other, even though they would never admit it. But still, it's a little scarce. And Beth is practically non-existent. Chopped liver might get more screen time than her. So while the biggest strength of this season is its focus on Rick, it's also kind of a double-edged sword for the development of the cast of characters that I've really grown to like. And speaking of Rick's development, episode 5 was amazing, but there's also one little piece of criticism that I have, and that is, well, its placement. Since it was in the middle of the season rather than a finale, there were 5 more episodes after it. Episodes where Rick has to go on wacky adventures, kind of glossing over and slightly completely minimizing the huge impact of Rick questioning his entire life and purpose of living. Just imagine for a second if episode 5 was actually episode 8 or 9. Instead of Rick going on these crazy adventures like discovering the afterlife, seemingly content with what's happened with Rick Prime, imagine there's this looming depression over Rick for an episode or two. And then we got this final scene, where Rick has to finally come to terms with moving on from his past. I think this would have been a much more impactful conclusion to season 7. Mind you, it's still a hell of a scene and I love it, as I said before, but this is just a slight criticism. Now, this is my biggest criticism of the season, and I was a little reluctant to even include this in my video, mainly because it's difficult to describe why I feel this way, and that is the comedy. I just didn't think this season was that funny. Actually, if I were to compare it, I would say that this is the least funniest season of all the seasons. Besides a specific few episodes, I just didn't find myself laughing throughout as I used to. There would be a few moments here and there, but that's about it. And the reason why I think this point is really hard to dissect is because comedy is really subjective. And you might be thinking to yourself, Little Queso, you fucking idiot, everything you've said in this video is subjective. Reviews are subjective. And well, that is true, but comedy in my opinion is on an entirely different level. A joke that one person might laugh to can be completely unfunny to another person. You could analyze the setup, the punchline, like a reviewer analyzes a show, movie, or game, but then that really starts to take the comedy and fun out of a joke. Have you ever been in a situation where you or your friend tried to explain why a joke is funny? It is so infuriating. By the end of it, I just wish I never even said the goddamn thing. So I won't go in depth on a specific scene or joke and explain why it was or wasn't funny. I think that's stupid and a waste of time, and in the end of the day, I'm just a dumbass on the internet. But I am interested to hear your thoughts on not only season 7 and whether or not you found it funny, but just as a whole. And if I had to give a verdict on Rick and Morty season 7, I would say yes, it has some problems. Yes, it's more reliant on character development and plot rather than the comedy, but in the end of the day, I would still recommend this to anyone who is or was a Rick and Morty fan. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing, and comment below what I should do next. I'll do movies, games, anime, shows, whatever. But again, thank you so much for watching.